So in our sector, hospitality is very tough. It's very fast paced. There's chronic levels of stress. There's quite high demands with very little control over time periods. And during the early days, and still to a certain extent now, I always got told people just need to be more resilient. They need to man up, get on with it, face facts. This is what it is. I was the one asking, but why? Why do we have to do that? And so during the early days, I met a lot of resistance from a lot of old school heads, which was your job is not to help people who have struggled and failed. Your job is to teach people to be more resilient, to cope with the pressures of the 80-hour weeks, etc. And I went, no. It's like a sports performance athlete. You wouldn't expect a 200-meter runner to do 200 meters, stop, have an espresso, have a handful of chips from the side of the course, and then run again, and run again, and run again. They're going to end up with muscle injury. They're going to end up with fatigue. Their performance is going to be terrible. So why are we not looking at actually what's the human capability versus the environment that they're in?
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-specific podcast dedicated to challenging mental health stigma and conversations designed to inspire a new, healthier, happier, and more sustainable hospitality profession. The Burnt Chef Journal is proudly sponsored by Planday, the workforce management system that helps your business give a shift. From scheduling rotas ahead to tracking time and attendance, managing your team's careers to managing your budgets, Planday has everything you need to make your day work in one easy-to-use platform. Try it yourself with a 30-day free trial only at planday.com. Get your shift together with Planday.
Welcome everyone who's made it. Apologize for the delay, but it is Christmas after all, and this is a special episode. So thank you all for being here. Please let us know a little hi in the chat. Let us know how you're feeling today. How excited are you to have our new guest for this episode? And yeah, thanks for joining us. So for those who are new, my name is Mouna Laaragat. I'm your host. I'm super delighted to be here today with three new guests. I'm the founder of The Grit Makers. It's a resilience coaching and workshop business. So obviously, we talk about resilience, and that's what Tom, Kris, and Gosia accepted to come here today to share with us. On this live podcast, we're uniting creators, entrepreneurs, leaders, and builders who really want to inspire, but also they are here to be inspired. So if you have any questions in the audience, you have any comments, please drop them in the chat and we will address them as fast as possible as we can. But right now, what I like to share with you is a quick intro of each of our guests. And you know what? I'm going to be a gentleman and I'm going to ask you, Gosia, to go first and introduce yourself briefly and your own personal definition of resilience.
Yeah, sure. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure, Mouna, to keep in touch with you over the years, and our story goes back as far as 6-8 years maybe. Then we had a break and then we reconnected, which is maybe also a part of the definition what resilience really is, to keep in touch. Yeah, sometimes a simple thing like that, could be a part of the resilience. So I am a founder of Petite Giants, which mission is to empower children via personalized stories, but we want to go beyond stories in terms of the product. We want to launch posters, wall decors, and many other things that are personalized for children. So when the child sees their character and the name, they feel important, and then we can stimulate them in a way that builds their self-esteem. Now, that sounds like all roses, but the story is not all roses, because that business was launched 6 years ago, which is how we met. And we went through exponential growth, which may sound as an exciting journey, but that journey happened too early for me. And I lost control over that business because of that growth. And the end was quite dramatic because I had to close it and restart. And to restart that business a year ago was probably one of the most dramatic decisions I had to take, because it wasn't easy. Once you lose something so valuable, you think, am I ever going to get back on track and rebuild it, and why would I do it? So I had to go through a lot to be able to answer that question myself. But in a way, I thought like what I managed to build is what was also part of my identity. So with losing that business, I lost my identity and I didn't know any better. So I thought like, okay, I want to regain my identity and I need to rebuild it. And brick by brick, I started doing it. I'd like to say I was very lucky, but I don't use luck word in business anymore. I think I managed to build an amazing team of people who then, when I asked them, would you come on board and do it again with me? They all said yes, but they knew they will not be paid money. Yes, that was made very obvious from the beginning. You are coming back, but no money is involved at this stage. And what was even more interesting as I kept going and growing my skills is that I managed to recruit new people and the terms were the same. You coming and you building it and you are not getting any rewards. And I didn't promise anything to anybody apart from building a certain vision and making people just inspired by what we want to do, which is like empowering children. Hopefully one day I'll be able to give it back to the whole team. That's the dream. I don't know how long it will take, but hopefully we will get there. So that's my story so far.
And indeed, it was like super exciting. I remember like how we met. I was just finishing a talk. It was my first big talk. I think there was like hundreds of people there. I was talking about seasonality and how not, what was it like? Will you be my Valentine all year? Or something like that, of how not to always rely on Black Friday and this big like seasons. And Gosia was like, I want to grow my business. Let's do this. Let's build this together. And then it grew.
Yeah.
Indeed. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. And that's a very interesting take around resilience and the collective of this. And I'll tell you guys more about that when I share my view. But Kris, tell us more about your views on resilience and also, where you're coming from.
This is an interesting one for me because there's so many different variables to this in terms of professional resilience and personal resilience. I think for me, I'm going to take you back to when I was like 16, 17 years old, right? And I was in college and I was invited to be part of, it was a Dorset Expeditionary Society. We were going to go away to Ecuador for 6 months. And in order to go away to Ecuador for 6 months, we had to pass a survival weekend, which was a 3-day weekend in the Brecon Beacons in the south of Wales in the middle of winter. And this is the day before, like, mobile phones had just started to come out at this time. And I was an introvert. I was struggling with depression at the time as well. And we went away with a few friends and a few uni students. So people who were a couple of years older, a little bit more emotionally mature than perhaps I was, a little bit more experienced in life. And the first task that we had when we got off the bus was we had all technology taken away from us. We didn't have Google Maps back then. I mean, I'm 40, so it's not that long ago. But we had our phones taken off of us. We had a crudely drawn, hand-drawn map on the back of a piece of paper. And we were said, right, we were told, you've got your 20-kilo backpack on, everything you need for the weekend. Off you go, walk the path. And it was snowing. It was freezing cold. You were intimidated because you didn't know what you'd signed up for. You'd driven 2-3 hours to get there, and you just got off the bus and off you go. But you managed to navigate your way around this course, and you finish, and you get back, and in your head you've gone, oh, I've done that. That was brutal. I was scared. Every time a sheep moved in the field, I thought it was a wolf, right? I didn't know what I'd let myself in for. And I got back, and I was like, thank God that's done. And the organizer said, what are you doing back here? I said, well, I've done the circuit. I've completed it. I'm a success. And they went, no, off you go again. You go until we tell you to stop. So I walked around, and the second time I got back, and I was like, this has got to be it now. And they said, what are you doing back here? Go again. And so I'm walking around, and you get lost, and like your brain starts to play tricks on you. And did this 4 times. And every single time your morale dropped, and you started to think, oh God, like how many more times are we doing this? And they asked me a question when we got to the end, and this was just the first night. We hadn't even camped at this point, and they said to me, if you don't get the question right within a mile or two, you have to go again. They said, how many miles have you done? I said, oh, I don't know, about 12 miles. And they were like, okay, you're short by a mile. You're lucky you get to camp in a field, but you've got no watch, no phone. If you don't get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're out of this. Like, you're ejected straight away. So you spend the whole night micro sleeping, you're freezing cold, you're covered in snow. And for me, there was something in that sparked resilience. It sparked that I'm not going to be defeated by this. This is hard, it's grueling, it's emotionally challenging, it's physically exhausting, but I'm not going to be the one who goes out first. And the whole weekend was eating mushy peas with pilchards and cornflakes, and just to see what your reaction was. It was standing by a tree for 4 hours. It was jumping in a river fully clothed in the middle of winter to retrieve a bag and to dig it out. And every single time I told myself before the event, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. And I did it. And I came out at the end, and I was the only person in my age group in my school that went at the time that had completed it. There was a story where we went caving and we had to dive underwater during the caving expedition. So we come out and we're soaking wet. We're just in these like mechanics overalls, and we get to the bus, and I'm like, thank God the bus is here. And the bus shut its door and drove off. And it was snowing. And we had to then to frog march, and we had to like practically run about 5K back to the pub in the middle of this village that had 3 houses and just a pub to be able to sleep in a cold tent. And it was moments like that that made me realize that my potential had not been achieved because I hadn't been pushed. Now, unfortunately, in life, I subdued that, and I came out with the most overwhelming confidence and pride in myself. But then I fit into society, I fit into the norms. And I think that for me, resilience is being able to push yourself to the point of no return, where you think you're not able to do something, but you build the skill set, you build the knowledge, you build the experience to continue. Now, long story short, I became unwell, and it wasn't until my mid-20s that I saw a therapist, and I rebuilt myself. I rebuilt that suit of armor. I spent 2 years finding out who I was as an individual. And ever since then, resilience has become part of my daily norm. If someone says to me, you can't start that business, it's never going to work, I'm like, just fucking watch me.
Watch me.
Watch this. If it fails, I'm fully prepared for the fact it's not going to go well. If it fails, I'll have learned something new. But I now have 3 businesses. They're all swinging sweetly at this moment in time. Every day is a challenge. But I learned, and I tapped back into that resource back when I found it when I was 16 years old, that actually human beings, our potential is limitless. What makes us get to that point is feeling uncomfortable. And I guess for me personally, on a personal note, that's what resilience is.
There is like a very interesting take to each of your stories. You see already how like we're talking about one word and we're using the same word, and it appears in different ways and in different stages as well of our lives. So I'm very curious to also get your take, Tom.
Yeah, of course. So thank you very much for the invite. My name is Tom Cullen, and I'm the founder of Zoplo, which is the largest Gen Z social polling app. I have 77,000 users, and we're in 182 countries. I'm actually an ex-investment banker for my sins, where I worked for 4 years before launching Zoplo, which has been going on about 2.5 years. My journey, and you can couple my journey with resilience, probably starts back to when I was a child, which I think for most people, because they're the most formative years when you're a child and a teenager, most of your characteristics, or at least the foundations for them, are developed in that time. And you can certainly develop them when you're older and you go through big life events. But if you were to plot every single life event that happens, the most formative and the most impactful probably happened being a child and being a teenager. For me, my journey started with my mum was a single parent. She was ill, couldn't work. So I was on free school meals, grew up on a council estate in Leeds. And as much as she wanted to give me the world, unfortunately, when you don't have much money, there's not that much of a world you can give other than love and affection. So growing up, it was more of a case of you have to be resilient or you're never going to leave and escape here. And I love where I live back home. So I don't mean escape in a literal sense. I mean escape in more metaphorical sense, become somebody else and become what, you deem as successful. So when I was an early teenager, I got bought a book on finance about 13 years old. So from that day, I wanted to go work in an investment bank. And it sounds very, very sad. But resilience to me was always about, you're immediately told, no, this doesn't happen and it never will happen. And up until the point it did, you constantly told, no, you don't fit the criteria. You don't tick the boxes to go and achieve and do this. So resilience for me in my life has mostly been centered around actually developing a framework and tools to ignore most people and go against the grain and do things what are impossible and that haven't really been done before by many people in your circumstance. What I think resilience is, so I think it comes in all shapes and forms, as we've already seen. For me, actually, resilience, I quite like building frameworks around things. And I think resilience to me is about how much you can take and the processes you have to deal with what you take. So some people are definitely more resilient than others. People who tend to be not that resilient tend to be affected by small issues and would be affected quite a lot, i.e. it affects their life, it affects them mentally, they think about it a lot. Now, I think everyone can build resilience, and I think building resilience is about building habits and building processes so that when something happens, you actually can increase how much you can take. Now, this will vary for people, how much they can take, but resilience is all about how much you can take from the outside world and still either happy, I use in a loose term, you can either be happy or you can just deal with life. So to me, resilience is how much you can take and how you deal with it, how you build processes around that.
You're building like the equation for resilience,
exactly.
basically.
You can tell I studied maths at university.
I was like just thinking that there's the trader in you that's coming out. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, guys, and every single one of you for being here tonight. I know it's like, we're the 19th of December. Everyone is just like, fuck off, guys. It's like Christmas time. But also what I understand in all of your single definitions is that each one of you have told fuck off to the world to build your own way and your own path. It's been really something interesting that got me into resilience as well, where there was always this challenging aspect of it. This like, okay, resilience is standing in the face of adversity, and we see resilience as being a very savage process. But the thing is, like, what pushed me to share these things is like, first of all, resilience is something that we do as a collective, and that in individualist society is very hard, because for me, resilience is that capacity to grow and expand. It's as simple as that. And when you look at it that way, it can be done with a lot of love and a lot of self-love. And especially when you're missing that component is where you start hurting yourself because you're just focusing on the adversity. And it's very interesting to look at that collective side. And Gosia, when you mentioned it, I was like, I had never heard of this until I looked at a French philosopher that was sharing that in the West, we look at resilience as something very individualistic, your personal growth. But actually, it's by connecting with others that we can grow and learn from each other. It's like if you're alone in a world where you're alone, you're going to learn certain things, but eventually you're going to be a bit limited. But by feeding onto each other and inspiring each other, we learn from each other and we teach each other unconsciously as well. And there was something beautiful about it, and about not just having a two-way conversations in podcasts, but having these like group conversations where we can share our experiences. And sometimes you're like, oh, fuck this, I lived that as well. Or I went through that same thing. Or shit, how did you do that? Like, I wish I had these kind of like weekends when I was 16, because that creates definitely a different perspective on life when you have to think about survival.
But I think there's an interesting dynamic that I often talk about when we work with college students, which is in society, we are taught to be diligent, to pay our taxes, to get in debt, to get married, to follow rules. Entrepreneurship, and certainly in the UK, is frowned upon and within schools. Like if someone buys fidget spinners for 50p and sells them for £1, they're expelled. So the concept of breaking and pushing past the definition of social norms is frowned upon. And it's not until you have that, I call it the fuck it bucket, right? Like there's only so many fucks you can give. And that's borrowed from a concept from a well-known book. But there is this snapping point where you go, do you know what? Why am I subscribing to the thought processes and perspectives of other people that is defining the way that I live my life? I'm waiting on the pay ladder for a dutiful bounty that may never come to me because it's not within the scope of the employer. And you realize that there is infinite wealth in the world. Even if there's multiple business models that are similar to yours, there's still a USP and an opportunity to fit between the gaps. And I think once you expand your horizons, but I do think that we have to be mindful that those who have faced adversity or trauma previously are likely, and this can be recovered, they're more likely to, it's like waking up in the morning, you look in the mirror and you go, today's going to be a really bad day. I look like a bag of shit. And the first thing that happens is you step outside the door and you fall over the doorstep and you step in some dog poo and then the bus splashes you on the way past and you go, this is just my luck. These things happen to me. And I was that person. Like I was very much that person. And that is your reality until you are given opportunities to be able to expand your field of vision, to be able to go, this isn't the story that's been written for me. I can determine my own story, my own objectives, my own trajectory in life. But to do that, you have to build confidence, and you have to build confidence by being able to be uncomfortable. And I think that's an important, society doesn't help us. It frowns upon building resilience, right?
Kris, just on that, actually, on the whether you decide, a puddle splashes you and it always happens to me. There's a really good quote I like, which is actually nothing to do with, it's actually to do with physics. It was by Einstein, who was like, the most important question of our lifetime is the universe a friendly place or is it a hostile place? And I think that's so important because that's up to the individual person. Do you decide the universe works for you or does it work against you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just need to say my story is very different. It's because both my parents were entrepreneurs. So I grew up in a house where we never complained. They never complained. There was nothing wrong. They were always on to building something. So when I went to university and I realized, okay, I need to get my first job, it was like, oh, I'm going to have a boss, but I don't know what it means to have a boss because I haven't heard stories about bosses, from my parents. They were running the business. Like, that's interesting. That's going to be really, really new to me. So I ended up having amazing career in advertising industry, which I enjoyed because I had amazing lifestyle. I was shooting commercials in Cape Town, for example, and traveling the world. But I still didn't like it because I knew what it is to be an entrepreneur, knowing my both parents were. So I didn't have to go that experience of adversity, world against me, because that's how I was growing up. So for me, it was kind of natural way to do it. And I knew at some point I'll do it. Not surprisingly, my brother is also an entrepreneur because we don't know any other way. Yes, it's a curse. It's literally a curse. It's
a
awful.
superpower.
The things when, collapse, Kris, we had a bit of a conversation before you joined, and I described, what happened to me, which is like I scaled the business to multi-million and it grew too quickly. I had to liquidate it. And I was like, I'm going to do it again because I don't know any other way. I mean, it's awful.
But that's exposure to a new situation, right? Like for yourself, you'd been brought up whereby you hadn't been on the rung on the ladder. You hadn't been waiting for reward and praise because people, your family had gone and found it themselves. So had you had the experience from employment of seeing other businesses make mistakes, like I think, again, that builds resilience. It builds that gut instinct, which I think that you start to recognize and you put processes in place. And listen, I run this organization. We're only 5.5 years old. I run it like next year is going to be our last year. I'm going back to Tom's point, I trade and I've traded for 5 years and I lost a tremendous amount of money in my first year. So much, 70 grand in my first year, I lost it. But it's that exposure to risk and it's being able to prepare for the unexpected and prepare even for, there's no guarantees in life. And I think that's the interesting thing about resilience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to comment on what you said about education system in the UK. I think it's a universal truth. Education system is not to teach children to take risks. It's not to be creative, because creativity, my definition, and again, it's a big part of my world, like what it means to be creative, produce creative content, products, is to take risk. You cannot be creative without taking risk. That's the definition that really resonates with me. Yes. So in school, we are taught how to comply, which is like the corporate world. Yes. You need to comply. In school, you do tests, you tick boxes. You are not encouraged. Things are slowly changing. I think we are discovering the value of questioning things, being curious in slightly more provoking way. But what I did to my girls, for example, which is additional layer, because I deal with 3 girls, not like boys, but 3 girls. How do I raise 3 resilient, curious, courageous females? And I always encourage them to be independent and question things, to the point that they may be perceived, I don't want to use the word rude, but really like strong-minded. And I never tell them this is how girls don't behave, or be polite. I never use a phrase, be polite. Never in my life. And I'm quite proud of it. Yes. So hopefully it will pay back.
It's
Yeah,
interesting when it comes to education and like teaching kids. Was a famous experiment in the US where basically they created really unsafe playgrounds. And he's found if you create a really unsafe playground, it's actually better for a child to learn, because when we talk about risks, they're taking more risks. If they're playing on the ladders and they slip and hurt themselves, then that's the risk they have to take and assess that. Whereas when it's a completely like cushioned, safe play area, well, there's not really any risk. So the children don't really learn about that risk taking.
Yeah, it's to say, I use the analogy when we do our resilience training about polar bears. If you take a polar bear out of the wild when it's a pup and you put it into a zoo, it exhibits behaviors that you won't see in the wild. It will shake, it will rock, it will do things that are completely unnatural. When you put that polar bear that's been kept in captivity for 20 years into the wild, it will not survive. It has no idea the natural dynamics of life, the push and the pull, right? And I think it's such an important thing. Like, I don't know, I mean, I'm a parent myself of 2 girls, and it's natural that you want to protect, you want to stop harm coming their way. But also the only way that I've ever learned anything in my life is being hurt, then hurt again, to be able to reinforce that lesson, right? I'm a glutton for punishment, but that is life. That's human dynamics. That's just the natural order of things, Darwin's evolution.
Yeah, there's only so much as a parent that you always have that conundrum. You love them and you want to protect them, and at the same time, there is life happening and you want them to grow and progress. But then also there's a lot of life that is happening that as a parent, you can't be everywhere and you can't see everything. And it can be frustrating, but this is also where trauma gets formed as well. So whether you like it or not, there are always rooms for
but
that.
You see, letting them take a risk doesn't mean that they don't feel loved. Yes, they know they've got me and my husband somewhere if needed, but it doesn't mean that we are there to tell them don't try. Yes, try, evaluate that risk. Hopefully you can make the right judgment, and of course if they come with something crazy, we stop them immediately. It's not that we don't care, by all means. Yes, but if they want to take risks, and by taking risk, I mean different type of risk, yes, going somewhere, but also in social interactions, talking to adults, yes, and they feel confident that they can ask questions and comment on things, yeah, that is also part of risk taking, that they are empowered to take risk in commenting on something that adults would say. So things like that, I guess, are quite empowering. And I was always kind of more convinced than my husband, and he had to grow to that position. And I kept repeating to him for years, telling him like, look, there is no magic button when they are 18 that you can press and tell them like, oh, now you're adult. Yes. Be empowered. Go. You're free to go. Yeah. No, it's a process that you
it's
get
called closing the door behind them.
It worked for me.
Yeah. So, but the proof is in the pudding. I'm running an experiment, probably one of the biggest in my life. I hope the results will be as expected and it will not be total failure. But I'm happy to take that risk. I think what I believe and what I read about in terms of child psychology, also because of the brand I'm building, should work. Yes, fingers crossed.
There is also so much about it, especially when you look into the growth mindset and understanding the importance of, it's not necessarily, like you say, that presence, etc., but it's also how an experience is seen, and whether you're looking for the lesson and whether you're looking for the growth opportunity, or actually are you looking at focusing so much on the failure at the finished product and you're told that you're never going to grow. But other than that, and I see some people in the chat saying hello, Christy. As usual, it's really good to see you. Christy is like always there in the episode. We actually met like this way. Super, super happy to have you in our last episode of the year. And Jason, we recently connected. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your own definition of resilience. So Jason is telling us that resilience to him is about embracing the suck and standing on its shoulder to thrive. That risk can lead to reward and utter failure. And our risk appetite helps inform whether the risk is worth it or acceptable. Pretty much like choosing your suck, essentially. Like, you didn't write that, by the way.
My brain was thinking about slipping down those shoulders and nutting someone on the chin or something like multiple times until you realize it hurts, and don't do it again. Just grip stronger.
But he did say that resilience evolves via lived experience, so that it can be also trauma informed. And of course, as like trauma informed professionals, like we do keep that. There's always like that tiptoeing around, okay, what is traumatic, what is not. And Tom mentioned that there's like everyone live things in a certain way. And there's something also proper to the individual and proper to what you go through and what you get used to go through. But there's also a component that you can learn and you can progress. So maybe you will have some predispositions to it, but even if you don't, you can learn and grow that part, that resilience muscle that we like to call. I mean, Uberman has his specific wordings. For me, I'm just like, oh, fuck it, it's just a resilience muscle. Please, people in the audience, if you want to share with us your experience, your questions, drop them in the chat. We read you and we'll do our best to address them. But
Mouna, can I just share something? Because I hope it's interesting and maybe it will broaden the definition of resilience. My resilience comes from curiosity. I am high risk taker to the point that sometimes I frighten my friends and they say like, you need to put on brakes. Yeah, I don't think it's trauma related. It's just this curiosity that is too much sometimes. And I run into problems. Kris, I lost 70,000 just because I was trying to trade on a trading app, which was then I discovered it was a video game because it was disconnected from the market. This is how I lost 70K. So hopefully this will make you feel better today. Yes.
Inspired.
Reading experience, and why not? Yes. But it's this kind of killing curiosity. So, I mean, I don't know how my husband puts up with me on a daily basis, but if I have, for example, a menu of things that you can go for in restaurant, and there are 10 dishes I know, I will go for the one I don't know, just because I want to try it. I want to expand my experience. I don't know what it is, but it's like this killing curiosity. Oh, I don't know it. I'm going to try it. Will it be bad? Probably, but it's fun to try. Yes. So I just wanted to broaden it. Yes, because I get, the trauma is quite common when we talk about resilience, but I wanted to add the curiosity element, which is my personal experience. Yes. Curious to the point that high risk taking and then being resilient just for trying things. That's where I come from.
It's such an having been like a really negative person in the past. Like I was quite heavily depressed as a teenager. The world was a horrible place. Everything was full of risk that I just didn't want to be a part of. But I think that resilience is something that you can learn and you can develop. You talk about opportunity now and curiosity. Like if there's a train that's cancelled and I'm in a foreign country or a flight that's cancelled, I don't think this is the worst thing to happen. I think, who can I meet? What opportunities come off the back of this? And I think I used to be the most scientific guy in the world, right? If I couldn't see it, or I couldn't prove it on a spreadsheet or in science or data, it didn't exist. But now I have subscribed myself to infinite possibility that if something goes wrong, I fully open up everything to go, all right,
Yeah.
what's going to come next then? And I say that serendipity follows me around like a bad smell, right? I have met the most craziest individuals that I've always hoped to meet in the weirdest of locations. They just happen to be there in a lift when I'm trying to find the 13th floor and it doesn't exist because it's the other side of the building. And the guy who I need to speak to for 6 months is stood next to me going, "You're right, mate." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just trying to find this floor." And he was like, I was like, "Fuck, Jason, is that you?" He's like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "I've been trying to get hold of you for 6 months." "Oh, okay, should we have a beer? Have a chat?" Yeah. These things, honestly, the world, I'm going to get too carried away. It's too late at night.
Yeah. I totally buy it. If that's something, but I wasn't always like that. I think that the last year, the painful year after things went tits up, really kind of helped me grow into that direction that you just, Kris, shared. And now when things don't go according to the plan, I'm like, okay, fine. Something interesting will happen. And it usually does. And I'm like, thank you for not running on schedule and as planned, because something will happen that will be interesting and different. And yeah, let's go for it. Why not? Yeah.
I think you also need an attitude of like life's more fun when it doesn't go to plan all the time. And like you said, Kris, you don't actually know what's going to come from your like bad luck sometimes. So I think like having that attitude just makes you look at the world instead of thinking this is a bad thing. You instead think, well, what's the opportunity here? Why could it be a good thing?
Yeah, like public speaking to hundreds of people. I've got no idea what I'm talking about until I get on stage. And it's great because I'm like, okay, I ask a few questions, get a feel for the audience, and I go, okay, I'm in flow state now.
But you see, that's also a mindset, because if you have this mindset of, okay, bad things and what's now, and it will be interesting and fine, you are nearly like looking forward to that, yes? Yeah. And you notice these things in this way. If your mind was like close to that vision of life, you wouldn't notice that. That's the paradox of things, yes? It happens because you want this nearly to happen, yeah? You want to experience this. Yes, you have this curiosity and this openness. Otherwise, you wouldn't probably notice. I mean, us all together here.
The mindset is what makes it. What people do when they try to embrace change, they embrace a different mindset, and you start noticing these things. You start noticing yourself. When you believe that the world is shit, you're just going to notice the bag of shit. And when you start believing and allowing yourself to see something else, you build that evidence slowly that there can be something else. We need to go through that process of building that evidence, because the mind is a powerful thing, but needs to be trained as well. And this is also something very interesting. I'm so glad that Tom brought this up, because actually it was like so refreshing. I discovered him through a friend's podcast. And it was just like, this person is just so positive and had such a positive outlook. And his smile hasn't left him at any point. Like he can.
It's how you get the dimples.
He can be listening to like the shittiest story, but he's just going to have like this humility and compassion and be even able to share, well, been through shit, but I still love that place. And sometimes what you put out, you attract as well. Mm-hmm. And you tend to find yourself. It's something we talk about in coaching as well. When you like revolve a lot on working on like very hard trauma, that's like all you can see. And a lot of like coaches are like stepping away from it, because you don't want to be talking deep trauma all day long sometimes. But it's a very interesting thing, because when you decide to focus on things differently and choose like the brighter side, doesn't mean that things are not shitty. Doesn't mean that you don't go through rough shit, but you just pick up to decide that opportunity. Like I used to plan my trips to the dot. If it was late, I would like be so anxious and I ruin my holiday. Like if things didn't go to plan. Luckily, I've seen the light when I got into the wellness industry and well-being industry, and was able to do that shift. And what I noticed, like Kris mentioned, now I'm just like, you know what? I'm not even going to rush for the return because the worst thing is I'm going to be stuck on holiday. What a shame.
Yeah, not planning and just there was a pivotal moment in my life where probably about 6 years ago now, I'd been through therapy. I'd rediscovered who I was as an individual because before that point, I didn't know, it made me quite unwell. And there was a moment where I pulled over on the side of the road and my gut instinct was so overwhelming that said, you need to do this thing. And before that point, everyone had told me it's not possible. You can't start that business. You can't have this idea. It's not going to work. And I subscribed to their way of thinking. And the idea was that I was going to do a talk for 20 people in Bournemouth in the south coast of England. And I pulled over at the side of the road and I put an Eventbrite link out. I set it up. I phoned a mate of mine. I said, look, are you shut on Mondays? Can I borrow your restaurant? He said, yeah, what's it for? I said, I've got no fucking idea. I'm just going to talk about mental health, right? I've got absolutely no clue. I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds. And I'm still quite sensitive to my illness. He was like, yeah, go for it. Fine. And I had absolutely, but there was this like a tap. All of a sudden, I'd just run with something, hadn't thought about it, hadn't overplanned it, just went, this is a date, this is what we're going to do. And it was the pivotal moment in starting an organization that, again, similarly to you, Gosia, has grown quite rapidly. But it was that first time in life that I'd really gone, fuck it, trust your gut instinct. See what happens. If one person turns up, one person turns up. If in this instance 70 people turned up, 70 people turned up, and you stood on stage like a shitting dog. They didn't know what you're talking about. Like you were terrified. Literally had no words, nothing planned.
Yeah, you see, I just realized it would be so interesting to hear your thoughts on why resilience is important. Because again, we may have different ideas behind it. Why to be resilient? Why is it important? And I guess we may hear very different reasons. Why?
So in our sector, hospitality is very tough. It's very fast paced. There's chronic levels of stress. There's quite high demands with very little control over time periods. And during the early days, and still to a certain extent now, I always got told people just need to be more resilient. They need to man up, get on with it, face facts. This is what it is. I was the one asking, but why? Why do we have to do that? And so during the early days, I met a lot of resistance from a lot of old school heads, which was your job is not to help people who have struggled and failed. Your job is to teach people to be more resilient, to cope with the pressures of the 80-hour weeks, etc. And I went, no. It's like a sports performance athlete. You wouldn't expect a 200-meter runner to do 200 meters, stop, have an espresso, have a handful of chips from the side of the course, and then run again and run again and run again. They're going to end up with muscle injury. They're going to end up with fatigue. Their performance is going to be terrible. So why are we not looking at actually what's the human capability versus the environment that they're in? And so for a long time, I was being asked to design resilience courses for our demographic. And I was like, actually, this is completely wrong. Like resilience is something that you can build and you can learn. And it's important. It's important in terms of growth mindset. It's important in terms of development, in terms of entrepreneurship. But also at the same time, if someone is being constantly hit with a stick every single day of their life, they haven't got the opportunity to think past survival mode into how do I develop, how do I grow, how do I move beyond the current reality. So that's why I think resilience is important, but timed rightly, it's difficult to be able to build resilience in an environment that isn't conducive to health.
I wanted, you see, what you shared is a definition, like reactive definition of resilience. Yes, it's to cope with the stress, which is a very important life skill. For me, resilience is to grow and enjoy life. It doesn't mean that these definitions are in opposition to each other. Yeah, it's slightly different take on resilience. I hope when we are resilient, we are able to enjoy life a little bit more. Yeah, which is like giving more opportunities a yes answer and going for things quicker and maybe in the wider scope. I have to say, I keep reading Jason's comments, and Jason, thank you so much. And if I can just go to one that he mentioned, which is again resonating with me because I don't believe in the stick, and I wanted to explain why.
Just want to make sure that we read his comments for the audience. Just Jason was talking about, when we were talking about like this growth and education, that it was also a matter of stick versus carrot a carrot approach based on positive reinforcement, whilst a stick approach based on negative reinforcement, and each approach works and it's dependent on the stakeholder. There was also like few mention on like other comments that we're going to cover, but go ahead, Gosia, give us the carrot and the stick.
Right. Okay. And I'd like to go back to what I said just a minute ago. Yes. Why I believe resilience can be about enjoying life a little bit more, just to say yes to more opportunities. And the reason I don't believe in the stick is because if you think about high achievers in sports, yes, their way to be coached is always positive reinforcement. This is when they believe they can make it, yes. And when you are given a stick, I don't believe this reinforces their vision and believe I can do things, which is like enjoying life more. And this is my personal take. And then I quite enjoyed Jason's next comment, which is about toxic positivity, because indeed it can sound naive, yes. But if you are resilient in life and you indeed are able to take more on, your life becomes more interesting, fuller. However, we all have different levels that we need to fulfill in terms of life enjoyment. I think I am too high sometimes. Yeah, I am the one that needs to be brought back because I tend to skyrocket a little bit.
Why would you need to tame that?
Mouna, thank you. Actually, there is no bloody reason apart from trying to be like, yeah. Thank you. I'm not going to tame it. God damn it. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
What did they unleash? Oh my God. Watch out.
If you're enjoying this week's episode, consider heading over to our website and supporting our ongoing work in destigmatizing mental illness and creating a healthier, happier, and more sustainable industry by purchasing some of our branded merchandise. We have a whole range of t-shirts, hoodies, chef's jackets, well-being journals, plus a whole host more available on worldwide dispatch. All funds raised from sales of these items go towards free-to-access e-learning content, as well as providing free support systems and help for those who may be experiencing difficulty with their mental health.
The interesting thing that I've learned about life is that professionally, I agree with you. If you are aggressively berating, you're not providing psychological safety to individuals with an organization, it can hamper growth. And there's a big thing, especially in our sector, where Michelin star restaurants who have been overtly toxic and aggressive are getting a bad rap. Now, I'm of the mentality where I've been in sales all my life. I wanted to join the military. I'm to a stit. If you give me adversity, I rise to the challenge. I don't always succeed, but I quite like being pushed against. It's it's the law of physics, right? For every action, there's a equal reaction. And I want to try and be that more than reaction. But I think that this is very much a personal thing. And I think that where organizations fail is that they don't understand the individuals in the organization. They do a one-size-fits-all rule. And that's what causes the significant amount of harm and ongoing trauma for individuals. So, I think we just need to be mindful that actually, in terms of building resilience, some individuals, like myself, do like to be challenged. And we like to be challenged regularly. And that helps grow that thicker skin. Other individuals who are maybe have had different upbringings, maybe are of a different mindset, that can be to detriment of their personal and professional growth. And I think that that's a really important definition to make at this stage.
I think a lot of people as well, when it comes to professional growth, it depends what you're doing. If you're doing you're a brain surgeon, or you're doing I'd even say probably in the chefing world, food, it's like high stakes. You make a mistake, it ruins the dish. If I kind of make a mistake of doing an Excel sheet, it's easily rectified quite quickly, and most people don't care that much. So it depends what the perceived stakes are. And when the perceived stakes are high, sometimes you need negative reinforcement, because it's you need to touch the stove to realize it's hot and that you can't mess up. So you understand what the perceived stakes are and the risks are if you get something wrong.
Tom, remind me not to invest anything with you.
But also I love how Tom is just been putting the pun here for the high stake for the chefs. And I've just been giggling like a child. But I have like 2 questions. One question, Jason, at some point you asked personal or professional. Can you re-clarify the context of your question so we can address it? And also I want to circle back to toxic positivity because it's like a big topic that is often like brought back. It creates this debate. I do want to believe that I bring people on in the episodes who are quite authentic, and especially for that reason, everyone is here. And that is something actually that made me like approach like Tom, because I was just like, how do you like keep that vibe? So I'll pose that question to you, and you guys can chip in. What's your thought about this thing around toxic positivity? Is that like info or intox? Is it like people trying like just to shit on others people parade? Or actually, is there like something we should look out for?
So I think like toxic positivity is like a lot of things. If someone is positive in themselves, they don't necessarily need to be very outward about it. Toxic positivity is when someone isn't actually positive and they are just trying to force it and like project outwards, and they want to be positive, so they're projecting so much, and it usually comes from insecurity. They're maybe not quite happy, so they need to force this positivity. And that's when it's toxic, because it's not genuine. I think that really positive people are actually just more subtle and quiet about it. So it's less toxic because they feel just positive inside themselves. I think it's dangerous when it comes from someone who isn't actually that positive, and they believe that the more they say it and project this outwards, they will become it.
See, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. What you see here is projection before reality. Everything was... Christ, even when I was heavily depressed, it was getting out of bed, brushing my teeth, or going for a 5-minute walk around the block. I didn't think that I could do any of those things. And I think that I hate the word toxic, and I can't describe why from a professional context, but there's something about that sets all my hairs on end. It sets my gut instinct on fire, because I think there's this cancel culture at the moment which says, you haven't got this right now, so you're fucked. And ultimately, you've got no opportunity to learn or develop from this. But I do think that in order to rewire your brain, you have to practice what you want to become. You have to see yourself in a mind's eye. So to be able to shame it and to stigmatize it by saying toxic, I think is terrible for those individuals who are just trying their best to reframe their thought processes on a daily basis. And so I just think we just professionally and personally be mindful of that, because I can't explain how negative I was as a human being. Like parties, hood up, in the corner, just don't talk to me, I don't want to be here, to the guy who faked it, being stood in the middle, being the center of attention, and felt deeply uncomfortable and was making it up every single second of every single day, gave me the experience and the confidence to be able to do that now in a professional context. So I don't know. That's just my 2 pence on that. It's just, I feel it in my bones, so I had to say something.
However, Kris, I think what you're talking about is like going from a negative to a neutral like level of positivity, not going from a neutral to overly positive. I think the damage is where, let's say, like I'm going through something, with my business, and like you want to be negative as a founder because you go through a lot of negative stuff, and it's quite healthy just moaning about things at times. And then someone's like, trying to be overly positive. And you're like, you know what, I just want to be like moan for a little bit. And it becomes like kind of toxic, because it makes you feel, why am I not being overly positive about this? But actually, like sometimes it's just nice to be negative. So I think sometimes toxic positivity can try force you into a state that isn't healthy for you.
So here's a perspective tilt for you. Maybe it's the fact that individual is struggling with emotional intelligence and the natural ability to empathize. And I think empathy is that ability to go, my instant reaction is to be able to fix your problem and to be able to tell you that everything's going to be okay and it's all going to be good and tomorrow's going to be a better day. But actually, once you're mature enough, both in life and emotional intelligence, you go, all right, let's have it. I'm going to refrain from giving you my opinion, despite that in my head, I think that it's going to be okay because of experience. And I think that's empathy. I don't think that's necessarily toxic positivity. And I think that's, again, you can have naturally empathic people who don't know how to demonstrate that, because we are just generally, as a society, I have hope, we are generally nice. We want to fix problems. Yeah. That's what we do. So again, just maybe a reclassification of that, or just a different paradigm?
I just realized that I may be perceived as toxic positivity just because, again, my parents running two businesses, they never complained, Tom, yes? So they didn't have the urge of complaining. That's where I come from. But I do realize, and Mouna, we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago when we met, yes? I do have this urge when talking to people to kind of raise their positive energy. And it may be perceived in different ways. This conversation just made me aware that it may be perceived as toxic positivity because I never go and share the, pain in the moaning way. I do like, okay, this is where you are. This is what's working. Go. Yeah. And there are different ways of encouraging people just to do it and just focus on positive things. But I do it in an authentic and empowering way. And I can't even resist to do it. And I think it's because I have this ability to take risks and just overcome adversity I don't want to say in an easy way, but I know that it comes easier to me than many people that I know. So it's interesting. I learned something about myself today that maybe it is perceived as toxic positivity.
For me, toxic positivity has always often been a kind of that blame game, when you want to train people's brain to look at the positive, to see what belief will serve them better. You do have to go through that training, and it goes through gratitude, goes through positivity, to looking at the glass half full. It's part of the process. Now, there is one thing, of course, is to be able to appreciate where people are coming from, that there is no one size fits all. So obviously you're not just going to give the same pep talk to everyone. Someone who's in the struggle, in the hole in that moment, you might have to sit in the mud a little bit with them before you get to that other sense. So that's on the professional aspect of it. But I do think that, for me also is triggering, because I'm just when you just label toxic positivity, is that you're deep in a certain state and it's disrupting to see someone trying to get out of it. And it's the same as when you're trying to change your situation and you would have friends or colleagues that try to hold you back because you're changing the version that they know of you. And I think that's what's happening in the industry overall. And we were talking, I can't remember if we were quite live already then, when we were talking about the changes that are happening, mental health in general, and how we start seeing things not as a stigma. For being in burnout prevention as well, it is still a stigma. And what happens is the more I'm shouting out about burnout prevention, the more I have friends going through burnout that only come up after, and you're what am I doing wrong?
Interesting.
Am I not telling you enough about this? And even if people come and label you as toxically positive, it's not enough, because there's still someone going through it and still someone not speaking up their truth. So what is your honest truth about this desire for change versus putting it in application?
For me, setting up an NGO that operates in 78 countries now, the desire for change was immediate. It has to be done now. It's costing people's lives. If we don't get this done now, we're going to lose countless more individuals that we know about and those that we don't know about. But one thing I think I've learned over the last 5-6 years is that, and again, with every response that I've given you today, it's with a timeline and a perspective in mind. And I think that we have to be mindful that if someone's struggling with addiction, you can't teach them to be more resilient. It's not the right time. You have to be aware of where they are in the timeline, withholding your perspective of where you think they are, but understanding when the time is right, the time is right. And I think, again, especially if you do good work, and we've spoken about the different levels of work that we're doing here. We want to drive impact. We want to create change for our demographics, and that change can't come quick enough. But to be able to have a timeline horizon to understand that it might be a generational thing, it might not necessarily be immediately. And for each individual that you meet on the street who says, today's a really bad day and I'm struggling with this, for us, we could be well, what's the issue? This is how you solve that. But logic is not what fixes those problems. It's time and exposure and its mindset shift that, again, I'm a firm believer that time is the ultimate. You have to bear it in mind with everything you do: projects, teamwork, performance, recovery, development. It has to be the right time, and that timeline is different for every single individual you speak to.
I was going to ask you, Tom, because you're the expert of the youngest generation. So I was like, what do you think? What have you noticed?
I definitely think that a couple of things I'd say about Gen Z in particular when it comes to mental health is people have a very positive view on therapy. People have a much more open and positive view about conversations. And interestingly enough, we ran a poll actually, and it was, do you have ADHD? And it was about 40-something% of respondents, responded that they had ADHD. And it feeds into a wider trend of people they're more acceptable, or they're more willing, to remove the stigma, and it becomes more acceptable. Whereas, I think when I was growing up, my best friend had ADHD in school, and the amount of stigma that he'd get for it, he had Tourette's as well, like a malformed Tourette's, and the amount of stick he'd get for it. Whereas I think now Gen Z are much more open. I think the one thing as well I would say about Gen Z on the other side of that is, I think sometimes there's a nice medium of when it comes to the conversations around mental health is sometimes people can get way too trapped in them, and it becomes a constant introspective analysis of yourself, that you're tearing yourself down and be like, okay, why aren't I growing as much as I want? Why don't I feel this way? Why is there something wrong with me? And I think sometimes it can become actually, you go past the point of being healthy to introspectively look at yourself, analyze and grow, that it actually becomes a negative thing because they're trying to dig and find something. A lot of the time when there's big stresses in somebody's life, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. And a lot of young people, especially when you're going through puberty and you're becoming a teenager, becoming an adult, actually, sometimes we just need to say to them, life is hard. Life is just really hard when you're that age. And it's okay to feel like that at times. And it's okay to, have multiple different mental health issues because life's hard. When you're at school and you're 16 and you're surrounded by people you cannot escape, who maybe are not nice to you, we don't have to do that. Like, if we don't like our work, we'll go get another job. So I think sometimes we don't really give Gen Z the benefit of the doubt, and we give them the support that they deserve.
So what was making you shrink there? Because you have a lot of Gen Z in the hospitality industry. You have a lot of young people. Is that a trend? Or do you think that the hospitality business changed humans and breaks you from the core?
Well, that's a chicken and egg scenario. That's like, does hospitality attract those who are mentally unwell, or do we create them? Personally, with my time in hospitality, I think that we create them. I think that the environments are not conducive to healthy workplaces. And I'm pleased to say it's changing. But again, timeline, it's like moving a cruise liner and not a dinghy. When you try to turn a circle, it takes time. I'm not Gen Z anymore, and I would never was Gen Z, actually.
Anymore.
In fact, when I was younger, we didn't have generations. So it wasn't, we didn't even have the internet. I still had to explain to my team members who are 28 and 24 what dial-up was the other day and play that back. So I'm not prepared, and I think we do a lot of talking on behalf of generations that aren't our own. I'm not prepared to talk about what Gen Zs feel because, frankly, underqualified on that area. What I have identified and what I've seen is that the awareness of mental health conditions are quicker to be identified by Gen Zs. However, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the call, we're still in nappies when it comes down to identification of illness. If someone is having anxiety and they're having it in heavy bouts for 3 days, maybe induced by alcohol, maybe induced by a life event, whatever it might be, that is, I've got anxiety. Good. Thank God you're alive. You're feeling the natural push and pull of life. I think where we need to be dialing up our efforts when it comes down to Gen Zs is what mental hygiene, what mental fitness looks like. Okay, great. You've identified that you are feeling depressed, that you're struggling with anxiety, that maybe your resilience levels aren't as high as normal. But what are you going to do to change that? How can I empower you? And what are you going to do in terms of a shared responsibility to take an active role to change that? well, I don't sleep properly at the moment. I'm on my phone until late at night. I don't have a healthy, varied diet. I'm not doing any exercise. Okay, fine. It's all very well and good that we can identify what mental illness is, not necessarily classify it effectively, because in different cases, as I've mentioned, clinically, you're depressed if you experience it for 2 weeks or more. So there's, I think, the classification element, but I think we need to empower individuals because it's okay to feel depressed. It's perfectly normal. What are you doing in terms of your self-protection mechanisms to dial that up and to be able to recover that? Now, we do see, I think, from all levels of all generations, individuals going into, and it's not just hospitality, it's legal profession, it's journalism, it's construction, and being put right up against it and breaking their biological and physiological code to be able to work and earn an income. And they think that they're failing because they feel unwell and they feel sick. That's not because you're failing. The most resilient person in the world isn't going to be able to cope with 80 hours a week. Fuck that. No way. So I think we just also need to educate the younger and we spend a lot of time in schools and catering colleges educating. What does a good culture look like? What does a good working environment look like? If you're getting touched by the employer, is that acceptable? How do you challenge that? Building that resilience to be able to challenge the environment they're in a professional way, and give them the perspective that not every single employer in the world is like that, and that there are healthy organizations. So that's my observation. That's not from being a Gen Z, because I'm over the hill.
You're already given your secret.
Just on that, actually, quickly on the Gen Z in the workplace, we actually just ran a report where we pulled out 10 of the most interesting polls about Gen Z's attitude towards work. One of the most interesting takeaways for how many of Gen Z care more about work-life balance and the culture of somewhere than just the pay. Like the pay still won by about 53%, but very, very close behind was that work-life balance and culture, which I suspect if you'd have asked 10, 15 years ago, even when I started in the working world, 8, 9 years ago, it would have been pay 80% of what people care about. So that shift's really, really coming.
Yeah, the McKinsey report's quite good for that as well. It shows what employees value versus what employers think employees value. And actually, it's not about pay. And we saw it in our sector where before COVID, all the chefs specifically were going to agency work because they could earn £5 more an hour than they could do being chef. But then they would last 6 months, 3 months in a row because of getting beasted. And it's not about in extrinsic value. It's not about how much you earn. It's about intrinsic value, what motivates you, what your purpose is in life, whether or not you feel valued, your views are heard. And I think that's the realization that the Gen Zs are bringing to the table, which is actually, we've got an incredible woman who works for us who's studying a master's, and she wants to work with an employer that's sustainably focused, socially focused, that has an impact on the world moving forward. She doesn't want to work I'm sure she wants to earn a decent income, but she doesn't want to work for a faceless organization, just pumping stuff that doesn't align with their values. And I think there is the most exciting thing for our society and culture moving forward.
It's an interesting thing because we talk a lot about, we start making generalization, of course, and some of them more informed, and we look at like studies or something. But going back to like a personal standpoint, right? Everyone going through ups and downs and different stages and different timelines, like we were speaking. If you put yourself back into that situation where, we all probably at some point go deep in a hole and we reach a breaking point, what gets you out of it? And what do you hang on to go past that? Because there are some times, and I just want to highlight for the audience, there are some times where you haven't, or we haven't gone past it and swirled around. Or what happens? Anything that could help understanding.
If we're sharing personal experiences, I can say what helps me to overcome, cope, is to communicate with people who I trust and who would support me. To have these human beings around you that you can really rely on is invaluable. It's not to say that sometimes it is the other way around, which is like you get dumped and betrayed. It did happen to me. in a very painful way. But then also I can say I enjoy friendships and relationships of very high quality that I know I can share deepest, darkest, sometimes, thoughts that are bothering me. And then with their support, that becomes easier to overcome.
I'd probably agree with that, to be completely honest. I think, again, you can only speak personally, right? These things are very nuanced and different for every person. So the only thing you can do is speak about your journey, and maybe it resonates, maybe it doesn't. But I completely agree with you. I think that a lot of it, without, talking about nuanced cases, a lot of the time when you feel like you can't really be pulled out of something, actually, it's about just having a strong support network, having those people around you who can maybe help you. I think being a founder, a lot goes wrong and a lot can go bad, and it feels like the end of the world. And we talked about earlier and kind of made a little joke about the difference in perspectives. Like, I think it's so important because in the founder world, you will always feel like it's the end of the world. And actually, sometimes you need your support network who are completely separate to go do something that changes your mind, and metaphorically, you touch grass and realize that it isn't the end of the world. And usually it isn't. Tomorrow's another day. And I think that's so important, having that headspace and those people to support you.
And sometimes it's a simple conversation that you just share and someone just takes it and asks you, okay, a question and another question. And you realize, okay, reframing that situation is probably going to be quite helpful and change the perspective and understanding, in a slightly different way and moving forward rather than getting into the thought loop that can be quite detrimental if it's not broken quick enough. I'm for quick,
Do you have a specific conversation that you think have changed your life because you've had it?
Like one conversation that I would remember that changed, or
the first one that can come to your mind?
I had one. I mean, it didn't change my life, but it will stick with me forever. And it wasn't actually a conversation, it was a comment someone made, and it just really gave me a perspective of my life. And I don't know why this has stuck so much, but when I say I work in an investment bank, you feel like you're the most important person in the world, and you're absolutely not. When you start there, first year as a grad, you're definitely not. You're probably one of the least most important people in the entire bank. But you feel the most important person in the world because, you build up this purpose and you want to do well. So you want to be really good. So everything's so serious. And I remember I was going on holiday. I was taking a Friday off. I was I'll keep my phone on. My manager looked at me and was Tom Barclays isn't going to stop because you're not available. And he said it as a bit tongue in cheek as a joke, but it just kind of hit me and just gave me a lot of perspective. The world is not going to stop spinning. If it's never the end of the world. Whatever you are doing, whatever you are going through, whatever's gone wrong, the world will keep on spinning. And sometimes that's not the best advice, but I think it's always good to have that in the back of your mind.
And of yours, each person had their different things. So two of you guys had that, the support system is the thing you held on to. Kris, I feel like you've had a different experience. What was it for you to not talk to anyone?
Yeah. Well, I kind of made it my business to talk to everyone. I was just reflecting upon it actually and thinking that historically I used to tell, and I still do, so my core values are authenticity and transparency. I say things that I shouldn't say, not in a harmful way and not in a polarizing way, but all my team know what profit we make, they know what loss we make, they see all of our financials, even my business. So you can go online and see everything. I hide nothing because that's my core values. And that's how I was brought up for quite an empathic family to be able to talk about everything, wear your heart on your sleeve, tell everyone everything. And I learned at a young age that not everyone was going to do well with that information. They weren't always there to help you. And it's not until I'm reflecting now that I look back and I go, yeah, having connection, having a safe point to feel that connection and be able to tell people about your experience is important. But for me, it's not the advice that they give, because ultimately I'm going to do exactly what I want to do anyway. It's being able to voice that and for my brain to start ticking over and to try and solve that. And I found the same with therapy. And I sat down with a therapist because I've never had a client like this. I was like, yeah, because I already know what you're going to ask me and I've already worked out the answers for the questions. I'm already 3 steps ahead of where you need to go. And she's like, then why are you paying me money for? If you're already there. And I think that for me is the benefit, is being able to externalize an internal voice I talk about the depression that I had when I was a lot younger, and it was predominantly, I was quite a deep thinker, existential. I used to ponder the purpose of life, etc., but also hormones at the same time. The combination was terrible. When it got to the stage where fight or flight kicked in, which was I need to put one foot in front of the other and just do what I can do to push through the barriers of life and build that resilience to uncomfortable situations. And so I think for me personally, having connections, having an opportunity to voice and speak, but now that I've made that part of my DNA and everyone knows everything about my life, there are no secrets. I think for me, the benefit I find is just removing that internal monologue and quieting down that internal voice and being able to get it out there and let the brain do the rest of the work and recover and think of solutions and, again, time.
That is very interesting to recoup on that, and the fact actually to have to reflect on that internal voice and like voicing it out. And there was this talk that I always remembered from Simon Sinek. I know that some people love him or hate him. It's like my Marmite. I adore him. And like one of his videos that stuck with me is the 8-minute video. And he's just like a strong believer that you shouldn't cry alone, and that 8 minutes is all you need with a friend when you have that moment where you need to talk. And it's not always easy to seek out that moment. You'd have like that spike, and it's like, just like, do you have 8 minutes? Being like a code for people to understand, okay, that's the moment where I need to be present and just listen to it, vent it out without necessarily giving advice or anything, but just the fact that you voice it out, you shared it, and it can't poison you anymore.
It's so important, like especially if you work in city. I mean, I'm originally from Bournemouth and I live in Somerset now. I live on a farm in 200-acre farm, so you could go weeks without seeing anyone. And I work in London every single week, and I just see how many lonely people there are. You're surrounded by thousands, millions of people on a daily basis, but there's no one that you can really connect to. And you throw out that leaf of connection from time to time, and you just see how tightly people cling on to that. And whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 8 minutes, whether it's seeing someone with their head in their hands on a bench and stopping and going, "You're right. Like, you don't know me, but I'm concerned about you, and how can I help?" That is a pivotal moment in someone's not just day, but lifeline journey as well. And it's so important because, again, why should they give a shit about the advice that I give them at the moment? It goes back to what you were saying, Tom. Like, that empathy point is my solution. My life experiences means nothing to someone I've just met. But to be a sounding board for someone, just to be able to let it loose, and for me to go, yeah, it sounds really shit. What are you going to do next? Is the difference between, in some cases, life and death. So it's so important to give that connection. Take your headphones out on the tube one day and just look at someone in the eye and go, "Hey, you're..."
That's criminal.
It's not the dumb thing.
I do it all the time because it's discomfort. It's discomfort. I feel it's uncomfortable for both of us. And I go, "Hey."
It's your self-destructive side that comes out talking to people in the tube.
I just love it. I love
have
it.
a question, Kris, for you, because I love what you just said, and it's very inspiring. And the whole meeting conversation is hugely inspiring for me. When you do what you do, what is the negative experience, if ever, that happened to you, that you kind of reach out to someone with a big smile? Have you been ever rejected? Does it happen often?
So I come across very serious. I'm very good at talking to C-suite. I don't smile enough, and often I tell jokes, and people just go, "You're a dick," because I don't convey emotion very well. It does happen, but I think when you throw yourself out, you got to, again, it's that risk tolerance. You got to be prepared. Like there was a lady the other day crossing the road, and I pull up in my truck, and I said to her, "You're right," and she said, "What?" I said, "Are you okay?" And she was like, "What?" And I turned the engine off. I said, "Do you want a hand crossing the road?" She was like, "Get fucked." Okay. Have a good day. Goodbye. And I was like, I was not expecting that from a 78-year-old woman, 60, 80. God knows her age. I don't presume to knows. But I enjoy those interactions. Like, I spent so long suppressing internal monologues, pretending to be something that I wasn't. And now I'm inauthentically myself. And sometimes people are like, "Fuck you, who are you?" And I'm like, "No one." And have a good day. Like, it's absolutely fine. I think it's like being like electricity, right? Following the path of least resistance. If it doesn't work and the capacitor's shut, just go around. Honestly, I cannot describe to you how much this is a learned behavior. You fast forward or rewind 10 years back ago, I'm not the same person that you see here in front of you today. Something changed, and I'd love to be able to bottle it up, give it to appeal to people and say, here we go, here's what life looks like from the other side. And again, that's where I go back to the time horizon. You can't do that. You can't just say to someone, in 2 weeks' time, that problem isn't going to be a problem anymore. That's their reality. That's their very foundation. That's their anxiety. That's how they feel in that moment. You just have to be there to be able to shoulder it with them. And if it takes them 2 weeks, it takes them 2 weeks. It sounds very woo-woo. Honestly, I listen to
I really appreciate you sharing your story, because that kind of shifted my focus from focusing on this raising positive energy to really start where this person is, so we don't do toxic positivity unnecessarily. And I really appreciate that insight, because I think that's something I might have overlooked. I'm really thankful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for asking the question as well. Yeah, I speak a lot. I don't often take a breath.
I appreciate all of you guys, because it takes a lot, to even share different point of views, but also ask each other and challenge each other. It is also what I find wholesome in these conversations. And I really wanted, I know it sounds like it's not as festive as we might think, but not everything needs to be festive, but it's the reality of things. And I think there is an authenticity in being able to cover these topics that is quite important to have. Mm-hmm. But there is still one thing that I know we're at the end of time, and please, that is the most crucial question that I want to ask you guys. And when you say, you changed a lot, and I think each of you has described how you changed and evolved throughout your experiences, what's your biggest win of this year? What are you happy to celebrate yourself for this year?
I can go first, because I'm actually at WeWork. So for WeWork, I go to in Old Street. They had this as a board. I actually took a picture of it and put on my TikTok of everyone's wins. I don't know them, they're just people who work in WeWork, and I posted mine on there. My biggest win of the year, I mean, I could probably name you quite a lot from a professional sense, but it wasn't that. It was actually learning when to ask for help and realizing that sometimes to know when you need therapy and to ask for help from just those close around you and other people, and that no matter what you're doing in life, and how big or small, that ability to ask for help. And therapy is always a good thing. You're never going to come out worse. So that's my biggest win of the year.
I will be careful on that, is that I do think that you have to find the right therapist for you, and to not be disgruntled if you don't find one. But of course, that could be another episode topic. That's for sure. I also want to encourage the audience. Please, guys, type in what's your biggest win. Jason, if you're still there, you've asked questions, you've shared a lot. Share with us what's your biggest win of this year. How about you two guys? What are you happy to celebrate yourself for?
Go on, Gosia.
Right. That wasn't really easy to find, but I think what I enjoy about this year is to become, and it's something that Kris, I think you mentioned it, I just have slightly different words for that. I became unapologetically authentic, which is sharing my experience, how it was. I come from advertising industry where everything is sugar coated, and I was trained for years how to, make things look much better than they are. But I think by sharing my experience, what happened to my company and how I had to kind of overcome that challenge kind of empowered me to the point that I know it's a way also to connect with other people in a much deeper way and attract people to what I want to do and make this purposeful for them also in a way that they enjoy the thought of creating something together. And I don't think I would go to that point if not that experience. It's a paradox because I'm thinking would I want to have this happen again? It was excruciating, painful, the lights went off and it was only a year ago. And today I'm thinking like, yeah, probably it was worth it. Probably.
I know how much that is triggering for people as well, for sharing personal stories. And it's true that it can be triggering when someone hears, oh, you know what, all the shit, that was worth it. I accept the trade-off and I will take it over and over again. But I completely hear you and appreciate it. And thanks, Jason, for sharing your own win. Jason started embracing his inner critic, enabling personal and professional feats that I thought to be impossible. Am I like
Feats is correct.
To me?
A mountain peak or a hurdle overcoming.
Awesome. How about you, Kris, then?
Such an interesting one, because I don't take personally, I seek praise all the time for validation, but professionally it makes me feel deeply uncomfortable. So it's only at this time of year, when we look back at the impact and the reach and the growth that we've had, that you look at it and go, that's good. And my brain's going, okay, let's look forward. So from a personal perspective, and I guess a professional perspective, it's being able to recognize how far you've come, rather than going, okay, great, what's next? What's next? What's next? But I think my proudest moment is I have an incredibly strong team now, whereby it's allowed me the freedom, confidence to be able to know that whatever comes our way, 9 times out of 10, it's been dealt with and it doesn't need any input. My job is to make myself redundant. Ultimately, that's the job of any good manager, is to be able to upskill and to empower your team to the point where they don't need you anymore. And I've done it successfully twice before in my career. A bit different with my own businesses. But looking back at the year that we've had, it wouldn't have been possible without my team. And I think that's the proudest thing. And we've got 250 global volunteers. We've got a team of 30 internally. And every single one, I'm so proud of them and proud of how they operate and their ethos and the fact they've adopted the culture that I set out in the first place. And that's what I'm most proud of. And a really heartfelt, Happy New Year. Let's everyone cuddle and sing Kumbaya way. But I think that is, I'm proud of that. Yeah, looking forward to next year.
Yeah, hell yeah. And I was super grateful for you guys sharing your wins. There are actually, sometimes it's easier to go and cry along together. And it's harder to accept that we do certain things right and tap ourselves on the back for it. So thank you. Thank you for sharing this amazing over an hour and a half with me and with the audience, for signing up to this like crazy lady who's just like, come here for a Christmas special.
That's just not crazy, Mouna. Definitely crazy.
Talk about shit we love.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And thank you as well, Jason, for the great comments, because I think it's really added to the discussion.
And I just want to thank you, Jason, for sharing as well your story, and sharing as well how embracing the inner critics and using your father's passing. We're sincerely sharing our condolences, and the fact that you harness that to springboard for improvement is really touching. So thank you for sharing your wins. And I'm super glad that we got to share that with you and you guys all that are listening. And it's been a wonderful evening. But considering the time it is, we're going to love you and leave you and turn off the live. Thank you so much. Please do connect with the wonderful Tom, Kris, and Gosia. Once again, if you have any question, just drop them. If you prefer to send them to me, I'll dispatch them. If you prefer, just connect with them. Follow what they're doing. Follow their work. They're amazing people. They donated their time right now and to share this moment. So please do connect. They are here to also connect with you. And it's a two-way street. Have a great night. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. All the kumbaya.
Feliz Navidad.
And happy holidays.
Really thankful for this meeting. Thank you.